All right. We are ready to go. Hey, Merril.
Are you ready?
We are ready. Almost ready to kick off here.
There we go.
All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome, everyone, to Season 1, Episode 11 of the Games People Play with Bernie Corbett. I remain Bernie Corbett, and we welcome everybody again this week for another, I keep saying it every week, but once again, it applies, very special guest that we have with us. And, of course, we are at the Fours Restaurant and Sports Bar, 166 Canal Street in Boston, right across from the Boston Garden, voted America's #1 sports bar and restaurant by Sports Illustrated. We'll stand by that as we thank Peter Colton and all the great folks here at the Fours Restaurant for giving us, well, I'd say our home away from home, but more accurately, it is our home here at the Fours. And we're very grateful, very appreciative of that. As we are of our guest here today, and I guess the best way to intro, if you watched the NFL, if you watched the Pittsburgh Steelers, specifically in the late 80s and into the mid-90s, there was a chance that you saw a number 33 probably running over somebody, a couple of would-be tacklers. That was a chance. If you followed the NFL from the mid-90s for about 2 decades, there was absolutely no chance that you didn't see our guest on his NFL coverage because he had more shows than Phil Collins had bands back in the 80s. And we have with us here today, very pleased to have with us Merril Hoge. Merril, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us, and sit back and enjoy the ride today.
Well, thank you. We ought to end the show right there because that's such a great intro. Let's not ruin it now, man. Let's go away and say, hey, thanks for joining us.
That's right. Thank you for coming. Good night. Tip your waiters and waitresses, indeed. Merril, just to give everybody just a little bit of perspective as we do on the Games People Play about his playing career, I would describe him as an old-school fullback, thus the fact that we did refer to him running over people, which he seemed to be much more comfortable with a very hard-nosed style. Also very adept receiver out of the backfield, and has a pretty amazing streak if you consider a 122 consecutive games streak for anybody in the NFL, but particularly for a guy that played fullback and played with the edge that he played with. Just if you're scoring at home, the average life expectancy for a career of an NFL running back is 2.57 years. So the fact that Merril played 8, he exceeded that. And once again, testament to his consistency and his tenacity, that 122-game consecutive streak that he compiled. And just wanted the outset here, we've had a tradition we've established here in a very short time, Merril. We want to make the guests feel at home. And even though, as I said, season ticket holder for the in-laws, the football giants, I have donned.
Baby, 7'5", Joe Green, baby.
Yep.
Don't worry. It doesn't get any better than that on it. Really, obviously as a Steeler, but really in football history.
It indeed. You're talking football history. You're talking an icon, and no doubt about that. So hopefully that'll make you feel at home. The fact that I also have a terrible towel here to make you feel at home. So once again, all part of the presentation here and the red carpet that we try to roll out for the guests on the Games People Play. So, of course, we'll be talking about the Steelers and the fact that Mean Joe was on the staff. I believe your entire career with the Steelers, Mean Joe was the defensive line coach for Chuck Noll.
Yeah, he was our defensive line coach until Chuck left. When Bill came in, I believe he went to Arizona. So he didn't stay. They didn't retain him when Bill became the head coach. But he was there when I got there. Now, depending on the age of the audience, I'm sure this will resonate with some of them. Listen, and actually, still to this day, Joe Green, he doesn't like to be called Mean Joe. I'm with Joe a lot, and he does. He actually says it's not Mean Joe. So he's like, that's why I don't even say it when I do any time. Because I could see him right here going, it's not Mean Joe. But he got that nickname Mean Joe Green in the Pepsi commercial.
That's right. That's right.
It's still, I think, one of the most popular commercials in commercial history. And it's interesting. When I first started working at NFL Film, Steve Sable is a historian upon a historian. Like I walked in the door. He's like, Merril Hoge, Pocatello, Idaho, Spud Bowl. And he started ripping off stuff in my hometown. I'm like, I got it. I tore down the Spud Bowl my senior year for a summer job. That's all I know about the Spud Bowl. He knew more about my hometown than I knew about my hometown. But he was telling me about, Joe Green's commercial. Why it was such a great commercial is because it told a story. It told a story. And that's why they've been so successful at NFL Films. They tell stories through film, but they tell stories. And he really taught me early as an analyst. He's like, tell a story. You can tell a story and be factual story and have evidence behind your story. And so he helped me with that, but he was a great historian. But to finish with Joe, one of the greatest lessons, I've never forgotten this. I think about Joe a lot because it was a pivotal lesson for me as a young player in the NFL. But we were playing Kansas City Chiefs. It was third down, and I want to say it was about 3rd and 6. And I was our third down back at the time. That's really how I got in the league. I was good at catching the ball, and I understood blitzes and protection, so I was a good blocker. So, and I ran good routes. I caught the football in college. I almost caught 100 balls a year when I was in college. So that was a strength of mine. But on this particular play, I had a check down, and Bubby dropped the ball off to me. And as I catch the ball, I got 2 defenders coming at me. The first down doesn't look that promising based on the 2 guys I got to beat. I break the 1 tackle. The next tackle, I almost get out of it. But at the end, I lunge as far as I can with the ball. But I missed the first down. And I'm on my sideline, our sideline. And all of a sudden, I just feel a force grab me. And I get picked up out of the air, and it's Joe Green. And Joe turns me around, and he says, Merril, that is exactly what we need. That's the type of effort we need. That's the difference between punting and kicking a field goal. So anyway, we end up kicking a field goal. We end up making the field goal. And we end up winning the game on that. What he told me, he's like, that extra yard matters. That extra effort matters. And I never forgot that. I'm like, from a guy like Joe Green, who I was a kid on the couch watching him do a Pepsi commercial, watching him win Super Bowls. Now I'm in the environment with him. I've never forgot that. And Joe is and I can see how, back then with all the great players they had there, that locker room was loaded now. And for Joe to walk that locker room, and he was the king. I mean, but he's a reverent giant. I mean, he can get mad. I think, that mean thing, he can play with an edge, but he's a very gentle, respectful, balanced guy. He's not like some, walk in the locker room of Tasmanian Devil. Now, don't piss him off because he will show you who's in charge, but his leadership was incredible. And to learn lessons from him as a player, they're invaluable. So I'm glad you got that jersey on. It's one of the best in history.
Indeed, make you feel at home. And Joe, don't call me mean, or I might have to get ornery, or maybe mean.
Don't do mean anymore.
Exactly. Words to live by. I'm sure that you abided by during your time with the Steelers. And just back to the beginning, and you just referenced with the Sables there with Steve Sable and Pocatello, Idaho, your hometown, Merril, and you grew up there, and farm community, and not surprisingly, Idaho, very much entrenched in the potato industry, and there was potato farming was a big part of the industry and the economy for Pocatello, Idaho, and you started working at a very early age, and I've got to make note, I guess, with apologies to Carl and Caddyshack. Your first job, 8, 9 years old, Gopher Trapper was your first job?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very few people would ever know. You've done your homework. Exactly right. I trapped gophers on the weekend. My brother and I, we had about 800 acres we were responsible for. We'd saddle up horses, and gophers dig 2 tunnels. There's one mound, but there's 2 tunnels. So you always have to use 2 traps because of the 2 tunnels that they dig. So, if you got to have 20 traps for just 10 gopher mounds. So we would set them every morning, check them in the night, and then reset them. And, we cut off the tail of the gopher when we trapped gophers. We kept them in a jar for the weekend. And then we rode our horses actually to the local convenience store and gave the jar of tails out. They gave us $1 a tail, which was big money back then. And, we make 20, 40 bucks, 20, 30, 40 bucks a weekend. That was a lot of money, when you're 8, 9 years old. And, back in the 70s, that was, you felt like, man, I don't know if I'll ever make more money than this.
And you made a little bit more than that. You've done a little bit better than the gopher tails. And later on, just a little bit later on, you did get into farming specifically and some real heavy work. Just to give us a little bit of insight, carrying pipes, regarding irrigation and so forth that was involved with the farming in your community.
Just so much different than the East as far as the summers go, where you get all kinds of thunderstorms. It rains here. I know we have dry spells, but in the West, you have almost no rain. You may have a rainstorm, once every 3 months. So, and that's why there's so much. They use the snow, they use a lot of dams, and they use irrigation. And so they irrigate everything. So you got to move pipe. There's 3 ways you can move. Well, 4 ways really. There's hand lines, there's wheel lines, there's pivot lines, and then there's really flood irrigation. And I moved all types of wheel lines as a kid. I started when I was 12. I would ride my motorcycle. I'd pick up a truck. I'd drive 15 miles out to my first site. I'd move 6 wheel lines, get back in my truck, go move 6 hand lines, and probably be done about noon. Take lunch, do some other work, and then I would repeat that every night for 7 days of the week, all summer long. I almost lost my hand actually in a farming accident with a wheel line, one of the pivot lines, which changed. Well, let me just put it this way: it was a moment of truth in my life. We'll just say that it was a real pivotal point in my life where I thought I'd lost my hand. The surgeon, that's back in 77 roughly.
I think it was 79, July 3rd, 79.
Gosh dang, you're better than I am, man.
Where were you on the day of July 3rd, 79? Please answer the question.
I was hoping that I was going to be able to get out of this day and get off on the 4th of July. That's what I hadn't been off for 2 years. I was like, to get a day off is like heaven, especially on the 4th of July. And then I ended up in the hospital. I almost lose my hand. But the surgeon saved the majority of my fingers and was able to reconstruct my hand. And when I think back about the technology in 79, plastic surgery, to have the hand movement I have today is a miracle. I remember his name too. I'll never forget it, Dr. Bacon. Incredible.
Amazing story. Once again, and we're going to talk about a number of the twists and turns in the plot of your life, Merril. And that was one of the early ones where obviously things fell on the positive side for you. And you think about the hand and the hands, as you said, third down back that helped to get you to the NFL, and that would have been dramatically different. The whole plot would have changed summarily at that point. Yeah,
there's no doubt. It's the first thing that ran through my mind when my hand was stuck in there. Is I go, I'll never play football if I lose this hand. I remember thinking that I'll never play football. Was all I thought about. I'll never play football if I lose this hand. And, thank goodness the surgeon was as good as he was and was able to put things back together, because you're right. It would have been very difficult to be, a successful football player catching the ball without one of my hands.
Absolutely. And another event that happened, a significant, eventful moment in your life, your favorite player growing up was Walter Payton. But he had a much bigger influence at about age 15 that would affect your life all the way through to now, some 40 years later, in terms of what you found out and what you learned from Walter Payton beyond the playing field.
Fast forward a little bit, 15 years later, I'm playing for the Chicago Bears. So I got to learn a lot more about Walter Payton. There's a lot of layers to Walter Payton, aside from being a great football player. But if we back up to age 15, I'd been on this quest for a few years of searching things about Walter Payton to help me in my quest to play in the National Football League. And since I admired him so much, I heard about all these things. And you always have to create the perspective because people that are listening to this Like I'm going to talk about going to the library to search for things, and people are like, "Well, library, geez, you got your phone."
Get the phone.
I was speaking to some kids on a Zoom call the other day. I said, actually, what you got in your pocket used to be on a wall. All right, it would ring, and you stood by it and you talked. Okay, so I know that's mind-boggling, but that's what you used to do back then.
Right.
So reason you had the resources you have today, basically. And I heard about this tape called "Winning in Life" he was putting out, and it was talking about a whole host of things. You know, him as a player, like how he trained, his family, his charity. And listen, the more I heard charity and family, I was like, I ain't interested in that. I'm interested in what he does. What does he do that maybe I could do that could help me as a player? And I get the tape, I plug it in, and I'm scrolling trying to find things that interest me. And I didn't know there was an interview process on the tape. And actually, I stopped it on this question. And I can't remember if it was the first question or it was one of the questions. But the interviewer asked him, he said, what makes you better than everybody else? I was like, holy cow. Like, if I could ask one question, that's what I'd ask. Now, I don't assume, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of sports fans, you know, listening to this, but I just don't assume everybody knows who Walter Payton was. During this, when he put this tape out, he was the all-time leading rusher in the National Football League. This was always said about Walter Payton. He's not the biggest. He's not the strongest. He's not the fastest. He's just the best. And I'll be honest with you, that's confusing as a 15-year-old because you're like, wait a minute, I thought biggest, strongest, fastest is always the best. So that always intrigued me about him. And after he was asked what makes him better than everybody else, he said something as profound as I've ever heard a human being say it, quite honestly. I still get chills thinking about it today. I still think about it today. I still live it today. He said, I want it more than they do. He's at 6 o'clock in the morning when I go run that dirt hill and nobody wants to join me. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I run that dirt hill. In the season, when there's not 65,000 fans in the stands, cameras aren't rolling and watching, and we're practicing, getting ready for the game, I want it more than they do. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And he said, then on Sunday, which you see, I want it more than they do. And what captivated me, and which really should captivate anybody or everybody that hears this, we can do that. I mean, that is a possibility because that's a mindset, that's a pattern, that's a habit that can be applied to anything. He just applied it to his craft. Now, not just his craft, he applied it, that was part of his life. That's how he embodied everything. But at 15, I am just green enough to say I can do that. And I applied that when I practiced, when I played, and when I trained. And here's what the ultimate results from that were. Do I end up being as great as Walter Payton? Nah, I mean, I'm close. But here's where I got out of that. At the end of my career, I got everything out of the talent that God had given me. And I have peace with that. Was I all-time leading rusher? No. Was I as great as Walter Payton? No. Did I win a Super Bowl? No. Did I want all those things? Absolutely. And it's not a consolation. It's just a honest fact. I did my part. And I think if people can say you did your part and you did it every day and you did those things even through the tough times, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, wherever you end up, have peace with that. And it might be the greatest of all time, but if it's not, that doesn't mean you failed. And it was a great lesson. It was a great lesson at 15, and it's something I still learn today. I try to share with people today because it's something everybody can do and apply to their life, no matter what craft they're in or what they're dealing with.
And you took your talents to Highland High School there in Pocatello. And there was an early NFL influence, someone that is still very much involved with the NFL that was part of the high school coaching staff, later the head coach who coached your brother, Marty, as a quarterback. But I believe he was your offensive coach, and he was also the head basketball coach, which, once again, the twists and turns, as Pocatello turns, if you will.
Well, Dirk Cutter. Now, Dirk Cutter was actually – he's about 5 years older than I was. Now, he was like the stud of Pocatello. I mean, he was awesome in basketball and football. He's a great quarterback. I mean, he ends up being a great coach, one of the greatest minds I've ever been around, too, quite honestly. And I put him in the same breath, him and his dad, Jim Cutter, with guys like Chuck Knoll, Bill Cower. I mean, that's the kind of respect I had for him. That's how they influenced me and helped me. And another guy that was actually one of his best friends and dear friends in college was Marvin Lewis. See, he and Marvin Lewis played at Idaho State together. And so, yes, Dirk coached me. He was my offensive coordinator in high school. And he's actually a big reason I got a scholarship because nobody offered me. Idaho State wasn't even going to offer me. He actually told his dad, he goes, you need to offer him because they wanted to offer this other kid out of, I think, Mountain Home. He ended up going to Washington. And so even though I was second in line, I got a scholarship offer, but I was not the first pick. I wasn't their first selection, but he influenced me a lot. Still, just he's a dear friend. We stay in touch all the time, and he was significant in my football career, my development at a young age, and a kid where I had a attitude problem, my junior year, and he slapped me out of that very quickly. Being the type of coach he was, and the type of leader he was, and the kind of person he was significant in my life.
Jim, the dad, as you mentioned, he was your coach at Idaho State. You worked your way up, I guess, by your own admission. You were 8th on a depth chart of 8 when you first got there. And from there, set 44 school and Big Sky Conference records. You set 2 NCAA records at Idaho State. As far as the experience there for you, coming out of a smaller pond, if you will, to the NFL, there were a couple of inherent advantages, though, Merril, as far as the offense that was run and even the offense that was run back to high school that kind of gave you a leg up on some of the guys from big Power 5 schools.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the huge advantage. If you go back and look at the history of college football, now I'm not a historian. However, if you go back and look at the 70s, the 80s, the early 80s, and you look at the Big Sky Conference, and you look at the people that were in the Big Sky Conference, okay, guys like, Jim Cutter's dad, Dirk Cutter's dad, Jim Cutter was there, Steve Cragthorpe was the head coach at Louisville, was a high school teammate of mine, offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, or quarterback coach for the Buffalo Bills with LSU for a while, Texas A&M. You have Dennis Erickson, you have John Fox, Brian Billick, Dennis Erickson. There's a lot of people in the Big Sky Conference. And that conference was more pro style. Like, we threw the football. We played in the I formation. We played at split back. We went to empty. We had to run routes. We had to pass protect. You had to know it all as a running back. And when I got to the NFL, if you were coming out of Georgia or Alabama or Florida, they'd talk about a pass route, and they'd be like, what? And they'd say, you got a pass block. What? And they had never done that. And so that was a huge advantage for me, because now you have about 4 weeks to figure it out. And if you don't figure it out in 4 weeks, then you're going to be gone, because they can't trust you. And so that was an advantage. That's why being a third down back, I was so effective, because I could read coverages. I knew about blitzes. I knew about our pass protection. And what I thought was my advantage was that I could counter for our offensive line's mistake. Dick Hoke, who was my position coach for all my time in Pittsburgh, one of the greatest coaches in the history.
Great Steeler, too. Great Steeler.
Unbelievable coach. He looked at me and said, hey, listen, you got 5 yards of depth. Okay, those guys got people in their face at the very start. They're going to make some mistakes. You have time to adjust. So if we understand what they need to do, even if they make a mistake and they get your guy, you got to be smart enough to counter that. And it really resonated with me. I was like, you're right. Being patient, understand the whole scope so that I can make up for a mistake that's made. And honestly, that was probably one of my strengths, is I could do that. I could counter for things. I could instinctively adjust to things. I could run routes and catch the ball. And that's really kind of what got me on the team my first year, because I was our third down guy, and I was responsible for all that.
And it's one thing, it's not quite a disaster to drop a pass on third down, but to miss a blitz pickup on third down, if the quarterback ends up on IR, that's a disaster, Merril. So that's even more significant.
That can be you're getting cut, and good luck wherever else you go.
That's right. Exactly.
You're no longer part of our team.
Exactly. That might be a bring your playbook if you miss the blitz pickup. Exactly.
There's no doubt about that.
Illustrious career at Idaho State. You went back a number of years later, prestigious Distinguished Alumni Award, all-time, number 34 all-time of everybody that's played in the Big Sky conference. They had their 50 greatest male athletes, over 5,000 yards, 31 touchdowns, and some tremendous. When I look all-purpose yards that you put together in 1985, you had over 1,000 yards rushing, over 700 receiving, and over 300 in the return game. So big numbers coming out of Idaho State. As someone that has spent as much time for decades, as much sweat equity as you've put in covering the draft and covering prospects, wasn't quite the exact science coming out in 1985 as it is now, but still your measurables were rather ordinary, I guess you could probably say at that time. So you had to combat that in terms of coming to the NFL.
Well, when I came out, they called me a tweener. What's interesting is my negative becomes my positive. So they didn't know where to put me. They didn't, because I played tailback for 2 years. I played fullback for 2 years. In fact, my senior year, I played both. I mean, we'd have game plans where I would change positions per down. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to play tailback this series, fullback next. I mean, I would literally change as the play was called, depending on what kind of game plan that we had. And that was a negative at first. But it ends up becoming my positive when I'm drafted, because going back to what I said, I mean, a lot of people who played fullback back there, Daryl Johnston and they don't call me a fullback because none of those guys would ever play third down. None of them played third down.
Right, they'd be out. Yeah, be out of the package.
So they leave the field. I was probably the only real fullback like that. Johnny Williams was like that. He played third down. He was, but not many. There wasn't just many that did that type of thing. Like today, you have your third down back guy most of it. But my upside is that they could play me anywhere. They could play me at tailback or fullback, and in the NFL, you don't have a lot of numbers. So the more you can do, the more valuable that you are, and that ended up becoming a plus for me, even though it was viewed as a negative coming out of college.
Your versatility really paid off, and that one report that I found was you didn't think that you had a chance to go to the Steelers. They were your favorite team growing up, but you said there was a scout. He talked more about basketball and your all-around athletic ability, but that turned out to be a good thing because Chuck Noll says, hey, we can make you you're an athlete. We can make you a football player. You're going to fit into our system with your versatility.
Yeah. Well, actually, Chuck I wasn't a fan of the pick. What
10th round pick too.
I went to the combine. Okay. The 2 days before the combine, I get sick. I get the flu. Like I've never had the flu in my life. I spent more time getting doctors' prescriptions of or notes of what I was taking, so that I wouldn't drug test positive for stuff. So I spent more time doing that. When I walked in there, I'd lost like 12 pounds. I'm glad they didn't have video back then, because if they went back and they wanted to archive one of the worst combines in combine history, I would be one of those guys. I was terrible. I ran a 40-yard dash. After I ran the 40-yard dash, it was different back then. They stayed on the field. A lot of the teams and scouts were on the field. I ran the 40. I felt like I was in quicksand. I was just interested. They didn't have the scores up on the board either. You had to go ask somebody what you ran. And ironically, I was projected to go in the 5th round to the Raiders. I happened to just accidentally, I walked up. The guy I asked about how fast I ran the 40 was a Raider scout. And I'll never forget this. He turned to me and he said, hey, you don't want to know what it is. He goes, here's what's going to happen to you. He goes, some team's going to draft you. You're going to back up somebody. They're going to get hurt and they're never going to get their job back. That's exactly what he said to me. I was like, that's odd. Okay, that's exactly what happens. That's almost exactly what happens in my career. But anyway, now teams come back and revisit you after the combine. And since I was so bad, I was excited about that. So Washington came in, the Green Bay Packers came in, Raiders came in. Somebody else came in, I can't remember. And all of them worked me out. And they give you notice the day before or a couple of days before, and the Steelers came. Well, the routine was I would go meet them, then go get dressed, and then we'd meet out on the field or down on the turf in the dome. And when I went to meet with the Steeler scout, he was watching tape, and no different than anybody else. I just introduced myself, said hi, and just asked him when he wanted me to work out, and I was going to get dressed. He's like, oh, he goes, nah. He goes, I don't need you to work out. He goes, I got everything right here. He goes, you play basketball. I'm like, is this a trick question? I'm in my head. I'm like, well, yeah. I was actually pretty good in high school, and it was my first passion. Actually, I was really good at basketball. And he goes, well, good, because you can make some money on that. Steelers have a basketball team. Asked me a few more questions, and I left. I walked out, and I'm like, all right, that team is not going to draft me because they're more interested in how I play basketball than how I play football. So I'm like, okay, I can work. The Pittsburgh Steelers they're not an option. So third day of the draft, and I was supposed to go in the 5th round too. So when this call comes, I'm not even paying attention. Actually, I was out playing basketball, ironically. Phone rang. My dad said, it's for you. I answered the phone, and it was that scout. And he goes, Merril, he goes, you can make this team. He goes, well, he said, Merril, this is the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he just told me who he was again. And I remembered who he was. He said, you can make this team. He goes, we're going to draft you in the 10th round, blah, blah, blah. And so he hung up the phone. When I got there, when I flew in for our initial meeting, he was talking to me. He had said, I've been trying to draft you. I was trying to draft you in the 4th round. He goes, I'm up on the table from the 4th round on. And he said, finally, in the 10th round, Chuck says, draft him, and walked out of the room. It's like Chuck didn't stay for the draft. He's like, he got so irritated. So I go, that's how excited Chuck was. He's like, go ahead and draft him. He walked out of the room.
he finally gave in.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, draft the kid.
Chuck Noll cried uncle, and you became a Steeler. There you go. Welcome to Pittsburgh. And you did your own admission. You were a Steeler fan, which I guess wasn't unusual. I'm always curious when people are in different regions of the country that don't necessarily have an NFL team nearby, but you gravitated toward the Steelers. Now you're a Steeler. What about what that whole experience was like as far as the kid from Pocatello, Idaho, suddenly he's flying cross country into the Steel City of Pittsburgh? A little bit of a culture shock for you there, Merril.
Well, listen, I'd only flown one other time on a plane, and that was with the team. We played Southwest Louisiana. So I had never flown by myself other than the combine, and I screwed that up because that was back in the day. They handed you tickets both ways, and I took the ticket. I flew to Indianapolis, and on my way back to the airport, they go, you got your ticket? I go, no, I'll get it at the airport. They're like, no, we gave it to you. I had no concept of flying. But when we fly into Pittsburgh, I remember as we're getting ready to land, I'll never forget this. I was like, holy cow. Like, this is where they film all those Tarzan movies. I'd never seen so many rolling hills and green trees. I'm like, this is crazy. This is exactly where they got to film this. And but yes, it was culturally, it was completely different. But to have loved them as a kid, idolized them, to walk in and sit down, and I'm in Franco Harris's locker. Everybody let me know whose locker I was in right away. They're like, oh, that's Franco Harris's locker. So and I thought that was cool as can be. I'm sitting next to Donnie Shell. My roommate's Mike Webster.
Oh, wow.
I get in the huddle the very first time. I got Mike Webster and John Stallworth sitting there. I mean, all these guys that I had, watched win Super Bowls and played for, 10 years growing up as a kid. And now I'm playing with them, and my roommates, we're teammates. And it's just, it was very, very, Joe Green's our position coach. Chuck Noll is obviously a legend. And it was very surreal and slightly overwhelming initially. But I adjusted after a while and give thanks, actually, that I got to be drafted by them and play for them and play in that environment. And the fans there have always, any football fan that's played somewhere should say that we got the best fans. I'm telling you, the Steelers fans are just as genuine, and they're smart, they're passionate, and they're everywhere. Steeler Nation is everywhere, and I'm grateful I played for them. I'm grateful I have a fan base like Steeler Nation too.
Your rookie year also a bit unusual,
Yeah.
but being an NFL rookie in the whole scenario of the NFL strike that year.
Yeah, that was the most that was the oddest thing I've ever done. And I still just couldn't wrap my head around it. I just made the team. I'm living my dream. I'm accomplishing the goal I've had since I was 12 years old. And now I got to walk away. I was like, holy cow, walk away, you know? And I didn't understand why we were walking away either. Mike Webster actually made the most clarity out of it. It was about the night before we were going to announce we were going on strike and what we were going on strike for, because we had to vote at this meeting. And I remember Mike Webster stood up and he said, hey, listen, I ain't striking. But if you guys want to strike for the right things. He goes, free agency is not the right thing. That's going to be for a select few in this room. Do it for benefits, retirement, and health care, because that benefits us all. And he walked out the door. And I was like, oh, now we voted like Mike Webster suggested, retirement, benefit, healthcare. We are unified on free agency. I was like, what? That is not the meeting. Gene, what? I was like, oh man. I knew right then. I'm like, this is going south. This is not right. I mean, so, actually collective bargaining agreement, in all fairness, we just righted that ship on this last CBA. Think about that. It's over 30 some years later.
30 years. Yeah. Over 30 years later.
Plus 30 plus. I mean, we righted that ship in a way that, and Mike was right. He was spot on. But then having to come back and regain. And actually, I'll tell you this: here's where another mistake we make. But I don't fall victim to this. The NFL says you got to be in. We decide it's over. We're coming in. But now a time frame has to be set. NFL says you got to be in by noon. What do? No, we're coming in at 1. So we're having a meeting, and I'm like, noon or 1? I mean, they're acting like children now. All right. Oh, so what? They made the noon deadline. I'm thinking, man, let's just go. So we go we're unified through this whole thing. We're going in at 1. I was like, well, I'm standing by Donnie Shell and John Stallworth. They turn around like, we're going in now. I'm like, I'm with you guys. I'm going in with you. So I go in. We're in our meeting. I'm in my meeting getting ready because we're playing the Indianapolis Colts. 1 o'clock, here comes, because where our meeting room sat, you could see the hallway walking back to the locker room. Here comes all the players. And almost right where our door was, Chuck comes walking around the corner. He's like, out. He goes, it's afternoon, out. He goes, come back next week. Nobody's playing. So if I don't come in, I don't play. In this game, the one guy they had cut, Rodney Carter, they had cut him. I had beat him out. He was the third down back last year. And really the guy the most he had a big couple games. He gets a hip pointer early in the Indianapolis game, or I'm not even going to play. They don't even have me on special teams. So even though I'm there, I'm not going to play. So now I have to play because he got hurt. And so we got a 3rd and 8. I ran an F option, scored a 38-yard touchdown to win the game for us. That doesn't happen. I'm probably not talking to you. I'm telling you, they're getting rid of me the next day because Rodney now is out for a whole month. And so I just go back and take my job that I was normally doing. Had that not happened and I not played that game, I showed up at noon, I never would have played in that game. And I think it's a different story. I just think it's a different story.
That's right. It was the 3 weeks of the replacement players was week 4 through 6.
Yeah.
And you must have thought of that Raiders scout. The scout's name was Nostradamus, the Raiders scout that predicted that.
I'll tell you this. I was a nervous cat. I was never more confused. My roommate, he left. They cut him. My roommate had made it. And he was center for Kansas. Paul Oswald. I think it was Kansas I think Kansas. And he was my roommate. He went home. I'm in Pittsburgh. I don't know anybody. I don't have a soul. I'm like, and then when we all come back, they cut him. So I'm without a roommate for my rookie year. So it was a very interesting rookie year. It was, I mean, nothing like what we're going through right now, but there was a lot of the uncertainties and changes and volatile issues that they'll probably deal with this year that we dealt with in '87.
You come to the Steelers. His name's come up a couple of times, but I'd be very interested to get your assessment of one of the absolute legends of the game, iconic figure, Chuck Noll, all the way back to his playing career and to becoming the coach that he became with the Steelers and the dynasty that was forged in Pittsburgh. Your thoughts as you look back to Chuck Noll and the influence that he had on your career, Merril, from the very beginning.
Well, he's the greatest man I ever met. He didn't just impact my career; he impacted my life. I was smart enough, thank goodness, when I sat in meetings, when we had our team meetings, especially on those pivotal weeks where we needed guidance, that I realized I'll more than likely never be around another man like this from a leadership perspective. And I learned so much from him, the counsel that he gave, the challenges that he implemented, how he developed you, were incredible. He got everything out of me. He got things out of me I didn't know existed. And I think that's what's great about a leader and a coach. He dug in there. Listen, he called me the stupidest player he's ever seen and benched me. All right. And then gave me the ball the week before, and they called me the dumbest player he's ever seen. So there's a wide scope there, but he's the greatest man. And I say that because he was a great leader and a man with integrity and helped me with life lessons, not just football lessons.
And I know there's a story that I noted that I know you've told about common to uncommon and the education that he gave you in that regard about what it meant to be.
So this is an example of somebody getting more out of you. Let's go to my mindset before I step in the huddle on the first Friday practice I ever have in the National Football League, which still is true today. On Fridays, don't make mistakes, because Fridays is a real script. It is a run through of what's going to happen Sunday. Don't mess it up. So I knew that. That was very clear. I understood that. So when the play was called, I took inventory of what I had to do. And it was a pass play, so I was hoping the ball got thrown to me. My responsibility as far as blocking, guy dropped. I ran my route. Ball went to the other side of the field. Quarterback through the other side of the field. The wide receiver's running, and the whistle blows in the middle of the play. And he points over to me and he says, "Hey, Merril, what are you doing?" Now, I'm in Pittsburgh like 4 months. I don't know everything, but I know one thing. Chuck Noll never does that. He's done something right. That ain't a good thing. I've seen him do it before. That ain't a good thing. And the ball was on the other side of the field, and I had run the right route. So my immediate fear was that linebacker blitz, but I located him. He had not blitzed, but I really wasn't doing anything. So my response was nothing. That's a problem. He said, "I can get anybody. We just cut and do what you just did." He said, "I'm going to do you one better. On Sunday, I'm going to pull somebody out of the stands and do what you just did." He said, "I don't need you to be a common football player. I need you to be uncommon. Go help him. Go help your buddy. How do you know he doesn't hit, fumble, you could recover the ball? Better yet, he breaks a tackle, you make a key block, we score touchdowns." And then he went into this dissertation about being uncommon, doing more on every play than just your job. And I had never seen that. And I was like, and it just opened my scope. I was like, there was so much more I could be doing that I didn't realize. But I thought I was doing everything just before that play. And it changed my career. It took me from being a third down back to a starter in the National Football League for almost a decade. That habit alone, that became a habit. I applied that in every aspect of my craft. I still do it today in everything that I try to widen my scope, look at different ways to make sure I'm not missing something. And it was just an invaluable lesson, that like that's what I'm telling you, how he developed me as a player and a person.
and a starter you did become, and remarkably consistent part of the Steelers offense. A team that was always hovering around just above 500. You had a number of actually 3 9-7 seasons, and the strike year was an 8-7 season. Some ups and downs there, but once again, you were a model of consistency. Over 3,000 yards in your career rushing, over 2,000 receiving, and 34 career touchdowns, and a career in Pittsburgh that was highlighted by, and going back and doing the research, as an NFL fan, you remember, but then you go back and then you remember, I would say one of the strangest and cosmic, karmic, magical rides that you went on. You talk about the best of times and the worst of times in the city of Pittsburgh, if I could quote Charles Dickens, but the 1989 season, your third year in Pittsburgh, was something special on a number of levels for you and your Steeler brethren and Steeler Nation.
Yeah, well, I don't know this has ever happened before. I don't know that a team has started out getting beat 51-0 at home by their arch rival, the Cleveland Browns. Okay, so that's bad enough right there. You win the Super Bowl, and it's probably just like balanced if you get beat like that initially in the year. It's like they're still haunted by that one loss, right? So everybody just chalks it. It's a bad day. Everybody can have a bad day. Had a bad day. We follow that up by getting beat 41-10 in Cincinnati. So combined, we've been beat 92-10. I don't know that anybody has ever started out in the NFL history being beat that bad. At the time, I remember they were doing shows on we are the worst. We had the worst start, the worst team in NFL history. We got no chance of making the playoffs. You can write us off. The season's over. Stick a fork in us. We're done. We're even on the plane ride. I remember Bubby Brister turned to me on the plane ride home. He said, "Man, we're bad." He's like, "We're bad." I was like, so he gets your teammates are talking about how bad you are. So we have to win. Obviously, our next game, to start changing the momentum. Anyway, we end up winning. We win. We beat the Minnesota Vikings, and then we just kind of switch things, go back and forth. But the game that was probably the most pivotal in that entire season to get us to the playoffs was the Miami Dolphin game. In fact, this becomes the risk. We go, me, Bubby, Mike Malarkey, and I want to say Tim Worley was with us, and maybe Terry Long. But anyway, we went out the night before the game, and people were telling us that, if you eat oysters, they're good luck. And so we're like, well, give us as many oysters as you got because we need all that we can get. We got to win this game.
Stock up.
So we eat the oysters. We go out. We kick the ball off. I think Dan Marino throws like 8 passes, and it's like 14-0 like that. Like, we didn't blink. It's over. It's like, holy mackerel. I'm like, we got to win this game. We have no shot if we don't win this game to get to the playoffs. Well, that's the first quarter, so it's 14-0. All of a sudden, the sky turns, pitch black. It was pouring buckets. The drainage system bust. You could see it looked like waterfalls. It looked like the stadium was a waterfall because water is just off every layer, every deck flowing on. Water's filling up on the sideline. The drainage busted. I got a picture of me and Tim Worley where the water is above our ankle and we're standing on the sideline right next to the field. So we end up winning that game like 35-14. We completely turned the table on the Miami Dolphins. We knocked Dan Marino out of the game, and we ended up winning that game. And I didn't care from that game on, no matter where we were. When we were in Denver, we're looking for oysters. When we're in Houston, we're looking for oysters. We're like, it's got nothing to do with how we're playing. It's like the oysters we eat the night before. Something will happen in the game. But we went on a roll when we got into the playoffs. And then we beat Houston at Houston. And it wasn't that we beat Houston at Houston. That wasn't actually – and we beat them in overtime. It's that we knew they were going to fire Jerry Glanville if we beat them. And Jerry Glanville was an absolute buffoon in the National Football League. He and I, when he wrote a book, and I didn't read the book, but his description of the encounter that they had in 1987, by the way, over
Chuck.
After him and Chuck met at the sideline. I'm standing right there. I heard every word of what took place in that altercation. But what created that altercation was Jerry Glanville sent some players off the sideline and blindsided Frank Pollard, one of our players. And this huge brawl breaks out, but nobody left our sideline. They left their sideline and attacked a bunch of our players and hit them from behind. Anyway, it was a mess. And after the game, Chuck went up to him and he grabbed him. I mean, he went up there. Jerry tried to say good luck and walk away. And Chuck grabbed him and pulls him back. And he said, "You ever sent anybody after any of your players, after one of my players, I'm coming after and getting you. You understand me?" And he started to walk away and he pulled it back. He goes, "I'm serious, you son of a." And because I was sitting there going, I never seen Chuck like that. Then we got the locker room and he was very adamant. He said, "We don't start fights, but we protect each other. And I'm going to pay for everybody's fine, for everybody that's going to get fined for playing that brawl. I'm going to go to fight for you." He goes, "We don't start it, but don't you ever not defend your teammate." And then I'm going to tell you this, after that, he never said another word about it. I mean, every time we played a game, Jerry Glanville's like, I voted for Chuck Knoll, and I spelled his name Knoll. Just to be disrespectful and classless,
Right.
He was always doing that. And I just caution the coaches. If you think players don't watch that, if you think players that love their coach, that doesn't add fuel to their fire, you're grotesquely mistaken. Because when we played that, that's all we could think about. We wanted to beat them because we knew they're firing Jerry Glanville as soon as this game's over.
He wouldn't be leaving tickets for Elvis anymore. He and Elvis were leaving the building.
He went to Atlanta and started doing that because they fired him.
Exactly. Before we get to that playoff run, you referenced the game in '87, which I went back. I took a look at the handshake at the end of the game and the fact that there were two dramatically different descriptions, as you point out, from the two coaches as to what happened. I'm going with you, Merril, as an eyewitness of that for that particular incident. But there was a game the following year, almost like you could say a prelude to playing the Oilers in the playoff game. You had a Sunday night game in December of '88, and Atlanta, 9-4, primed to go to the playoffs. A struggling Steeler team at 3-10. Big-time quarterback controversy that week with Bubby Brister coming in. You had Mark Malone. You had Blackledge. And that was a rather sweet victory. What do you remember about that Sunday night game where you played a pivotal role and delivered the victory for the Steelers on a big play?
You know what? I'm going to tell you this. When you're reading, I'm like, holy cow, that is a game I completely forgot about.
Okay.
I really did. I was like, holy cow, this is like I remember.
That's what I'm here for.
You know what I remember? One of the Deion Sanders was there with them, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yep, with 88.
Because you know what I remember the most about playing them is that we'd watch tape and Deion Sanders would cover people like crazy, but man, he didn't want anything to do with the box.
Yeah, not tackling anybody.
If we ever got outside, I remember I got outside the circle and I was going to run. I was going to destroy. I was going to blow every pad off his body. I was going to hit him so hard. And he got down so quick, I about blew my shoulder out because I hit the ground so hard. I was like, I completely missed him. I was like, maybe next time I just make a move and keep going. That's the only thing I remember that game.
You had the game-winning touchdown on a pass from Bubby Brister. Final minute, 27 seconds left, and delivered the victory back to the Steeltown, 37-34. So, safe to say, I guess you probably already answered the question, but I can tell you're the adrenaline is flowing there right now. That rivalry, that was the rivalry for your playing career in Pittsburgh. It would seem that was your marquee rival. Even though the Browns were the Browns, it was still that Houston-Glanville thing,
we actually, we really, all three of them were big. They had their build-up to all, because you remember Cincinnati had went to the Super Bowl in, what was it, 88?
88.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they were good. Cleveland kept getting close. Houston was supposed to win it every year, and we were just kind of like the doormat, at that time. And people would probably remember that. But so when we'd pop them, we'd knock them off. I mean, because we were such a young team. Chuck was developing us at that time. We were so young. We had no experience really anywhere. I can't think of, Tunch Yoakum might have been our most experienced right tackle, and that was it. I mean, everybody else was first, second, third year across the board, offense and defense. Our whole DB, our whole backfield, aside from Dwayne Woodruff, was drafted in 1987 with me. Delton Hall, Woodson, Thomas Everett. Cardinal Lake comes later, and Thomas Everett leaves. Greg Lloyd, and then they bring Kevin Green in with Bill Cower, but now we're like in our 5th or 6th year, and we're starting to gel as a team, and we're starting to evolve, and then the tide just changed there, and quite honestly, it's kind of been like that ever since.
Yeah, I was going to say for a while. Looking back, you just reference your accuracy on that '89 season. No NFL team has ever made the playoffs after being blown out so badly in their first 2 games. You didn't cross 500 until week 15 when you finally got up over that mark to 8-7. You had to win those last 3 to finish 9-7 and to get the wild card. And you mentioned him earlier on a couple of occasions. You had to deal at the beginning of the year with the release of Mike Webster, the rock of which the franchise was built at the center position, the Hall of Famer.
Yeah, that was from my young perspective, it was just like, nobody's invincible. When that was what that really taught me, is I was like, geez. Now you got to realize, teams are together all the time, meetings, fans, you're privy to 1:00 on Sunday, a few highlights, what the news gives you. Shoot, they knew what they had in Damani Dawson. Damani Dawson
right.
ends up being a Hall of Famer. And I'll be honest, I thought nobody that would be as good as Mike Webster. And Mike Webster, as far as toughness, consistency, and there'd be nobody like that. But Mike Webster couldn't do what Damani Dawson did. I mean, Damani Dawson changed how you ran the football because he could pull as a center. And I remember when I went to Chicago, the coaching staff brought me in. They're like, hey, how you guys run, your boss plays, your strong plays. So I put up some fronts and go, okay, well, listen, if they do this reduce front here, guard, center makes a call to guard pulls down, center pulls. Like, whoa, we can't pull our center. Like, well, then you can't do what we did. I was like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm like, then we're in trouble, because that's what made us great, is we could pull our center. He could pull and run. So I don't know what to tell you.
One other note with your 2 decades as a broadcaster, how many times, what do you think the over-under is, Merril, on the number of times that you said in 20 years on ESPN, division games are so important? Well, you defied that one that year. You were 1-5 in the division. You avenged the loss to the Browns, but that was the only division game you won that year, and you made it to the second round of the playoffs.
Like I said, I'll tell you, that year it may never be. I mean, it may never be duplicated ever again. I just the magic. I mean, shoot, if you think about that year, you remember, right? The deciding game comes down to Monday Night Football. Cincinnati's playing in Minnesota. There's 2 playoff teams at bay on this. Put it this way: whoever wins the game is going to the playoffs. So if Cincinnati wins, they go, we don't. And that means Green Bay goes. If Minnesota wins, they go, and the Steelers go. So one of the teams were going to go who won, and the loser was going to send out of the division to one of us, Packers or Steelers, were going to go to the playoffs. So we had to wait till that game was concluded to know if we'd even made the playoffs. So that was late Monday night. And back up to the Tampa game where we beat the Tampa Bay Bucks, we had to wait for that game. And the 2 things that happened on Sunday were not expected. The 2 teams that were favored lost. That was another thing that happened. The teams that were favored lost on the Sunday. We win. I think we were favored. We might have. I can't remember if we were favored or not, but it was probably weren't favored by much. But we win. And I remember what Chuck said in the locker room right after. He said, we'll see you on Tuesday. And everybody's kind of like, well, we can still got Monday Night Football still got to play, right? But nobody said anything. So let's go fast forward to Tuesday morning. Chuck walks up in front of all of us. His first thing he says, well, it appears we have some non-believers. So what he meant by that is some players had gambled that we weren't going to make the playoffs and went home.
Oh.
Then the Monday night game, Cincinnati loses, and we're going. They're scrambling to get back.
Got to get back.
So that's why when he walked in, he goes, and it appears we have some non-believers.
Should always trust funny, Chuck. Chuck, you trust.
Amen.
No doubt. And as far as that playoff run, it was fittingly. I remember the '80s. Once again, as I said, a fan of the in-laws, the Giants, and the Merril family. I've been a long-time season ticket holder, and I have a special place in my heart for the '80s and that era. The last game in the '80s was December 31st, 1989, at the Houston Astrodome, and it was the Steelers, a 7-point underdog, coming into play Jerry Glanville and the Oilers, and you saved, well, I'd say back-to-back to at the most opportune and most significant time, two of your greatest performances on the field, a testament to you and answering the call at that time. Let's start with that game in Houston. Your memories, you had a 100-yard game. You had 3 big catches in the game also, touchdown. But memories of circumstances going down to Houston and I guess getting everybody back in the program again after some guys went home at the beginning of the week, but being able to rally and not only in the playoffs, but there's Jerry Glanville and those there's the guys with the black hats on. There's the villains with the Oilers across from you.
Yeah, well, I will tell you this. There was just a certain level of a different energy with those guys because of what Jerry would do. He sent bounties. He did all kinds of things that were, just lacked integrity and class in every level. But that was the environment that, that's why they called it the House of Pain. They nicknamed it that. We knew that we were going to deal with other circumstances aside from just playing football. So how could we just keep it within football? When I go back and think of that game, though, probably the most there was a couple of significant moments in that game when we had to put the last drive on to put the game into overtime.
Yep. We
ended up calling a reverse play on that play. Now, keep in mind, in the huddle, you could not hear anything. I mean, it was as loud as I've ever been until I go to Denver. Then Denver blew that away. But at that moment, I've never been in an environment where you could just, we were leaning ear to ear and screaming, the play and what the adjustments we need to make and talk to each other. And we ran that reverse with Dwight Stone and we stung them. And Tom Moore was our offensive coordinator at that time. Tom Moore was
one of the best.
Peyton Manning, yeah, he's one of the best in the history of football. He orchestrated Peyton Manning's career. He's with Tom Brady now in Tampa. He calls that reverse, we sting him with, I can't remember, another pass play a little later. Then I score a touchdown. We end up tying. It was the overtime period, though, that was a big pivotal aspect. When Rod Woodson tackled their back, Lorenzo White, I think it was.
Yep, Lorenzo White.
Fumbled, and he recovered the ball. The next play, we came out with this counter play because we had them on the ropes. Now, their defensive line was dragging. And I went about 12 yards, and that put us in field goal range right there. And, like, those 3 plays towards the end of the game put us in a position to win. But all that being said, this is how delirious I was. I've never been more exhausted in a game. I remember I was on one knee at the sideline. This is how exhausted I was. I remember thinking, okay, he's either got Gary Anderson's our kicker. He's either got to make it or I can't play. I'm done. I got no more. I don't think I could go back now. I'd go back on, but I'm like, I was physically and mentally done. This is how mentally done I was. I look up at the scoreboard and it says, this is the first attempt for Gary Anderson at a 50-yard field goal. I'm like, oh my gosh. This dude's been around since the dinosaurs. He's never kicked it. I'm starting losing my mind. I'm like, this is unbelievable. He's never going to make this. I start going, I'm doing this turmoil with myself. And I just glanced back up at the screen that says this season. I was like, I forgot to read the last sentence. This season. About then, they snapped the ball, boom, right through the uprights. I mean, just like Gary Anderson, Mr. Automatic. And then the energy, we just erupted. But those back and forth moments were, because they were such pivotal moments, at the end of the game and then in overtime, the intensity of it all. I'll never forget. It's just, as I'm explaining it today, I can almost relive those feelings and emotions and the intensity that goes on, the extreme focus that takes place. And here's what I ultimately think is a big difference is, man, wanting to be in that environment, like enjoying it, not intimidated by it, not going, ooh, I mean, it was like, loved it. Like, I love it, man. And, the louder they got, the better it was, so it didn't harm us, didn't hurt us. It elevated us, really.
And elevate, that's an appropriate term, very apropos. Elevate you had to do the next week in more ways than one. You headed out to the Mile High City. Now you had the noise and you had the altitude to deal with. And, oh, by the way, a 10-point underdog, very heavily favored Denver Broncos team. And from the high to the low, Merril, the elation of the win in Houston and your memories of one of the more memorable playoff games of that era in the NFL, the game in Denver, which had so much drama.
Yeah, we, that game, that game was, when I go back and look at and think about, turnovers matter. I've always said, there's only one stat I care about in football. If you give me who's going to turn the ball over, I'll give you a good idea who's going to win. If it's a clean game, then we got to talk. We talk differently. We fumbled the ball on our 50. John Elway, as great as Elway is, he only makes one throw in this whole freaking game. John Elway was not very good in this game. I mean, they win the game, and I'm the MVP of the game. That tells you.
Oh, no doubt.
I mean, John Elway, he threw a touchdown pass after we fumbled on the 50. It is the only throw I think he made in the entire really game that mattered, but it ends up being a significant difference. Bubby was on fire. Unfortunately, we had a third down play. I can't remember the last guy. Mark Stock, I think, dropped a pass on a third down that if he'd have kept running and caught it, he probably scores a touchdown. And something I think that affected us that week that most people would not know, in Pittsburgh, it had snowed. A big blizzard had come in to play, and we could not practice. We practiced in the convention center, and you couldn't throw the ball down the field. The farthest you could throw the ball is like 20 yards, so we couldn't work on our deep passing game.
Nothing vertical. Yeah.
And that vertical thing really showed up in that game because we had Louis Lips on a seam route. Bubby overthrew him. But we didn't – I think that hurt us that week, that we didn't get to practice that. We didn't have a facility we could really groove that. We didn't have a good week all week doing that, and that hurt us. But it's a game that all the way up to about the last drive or last minute of the game, I think we had the ball, with 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. We were down by 1. And I'm telling you, we got in that huddle, and I'm telling you, when it was louder than Houston, this was when it was. We were at the commercial break, and you could feel the earth shaking. That's how they were rocking that stadium. And I remember, again, it just being – it elevated. We were just loving it. I thought it was great last week. This is even better this week. And we had one play. It was the second play that Chuck Lanza comes in to replace Dermontti Dawson, who had got a concussion, so he leaves the game, and he dribbled back a bad snap, and we lose the ball, because of a bad snap. Not anything Denver did. It was, what we did to ourselves. It was a few self-inflicted plays that cost us that game, but because we were such underdogs, and because how it went down and how we played, makes it a standout game. It was it would be one of the archive best, quite honestly, had we won the dang thing, but it wasn't to be that day. But when it was all said and done, it was a game that you just you play an entire career, and somebody oftentimes you don't even make the playoffs. To play in a playoff game and be able to have a type of game like that and experience that and be a part of it is a true blessing and honor.
Indeed. And you honored it with arguably your career game. Carried it 16 times, 120 yards, the touchdown, 8 catches for 60 yards. Very important receiver for Bubby Brister out of the backfield. It's always a big part of your game. You'd been out there in the altitude week 9. Denver had the better of you 34-7. And truly a heartbreaker, 24-23. You would the week before, it turned out to be Chuck Noll's last playoff win. And that ushered in just a couple of years later, you played for another Hall of Fame coach. And just your thoughts on Bill Cowher. He was the guy that was there to replace the legend. And I guess there's not too many opportunities. Well, you mentioned one, Mike Webster and Dermontti Dawson, where legend replaces legend, and it translates into 2 Hall of Famers. That's like Haley's Comet in sports for that to happen.
Well, here's what I admire about Bill Cowher. He came in, and he was Bill Cowher. he was going to do things differently. He had been around great coaches. Marty Schottenheimer's a great coach. He had great mentors. He didn't come in to replace Chuck Noll. He respected Chuck Noll. And the thing that won it over for us is whatever he told us, he did. He said, guys, I'm going to take care of you all week. You take care of me on Sunday. And we're like, oh, yeah, okay, we heard that before. Let's go to practice now, and we'll see how this goes. And he did. He said, when we prepare to do something, we're going to do it. So first game of the year against Houston, he'd said, we're going to run a fake punt. If the situations present themselves, and he gave us some scenarios, we're going to do it. And one of those scenarios presented itself. I remember walking off the field, and he'd go, we're running a fake punt. I said, what? I mean, it was like, I remember in the second quarter too, maybe third. I can't quite remember. I was like, wow. And he does that, and that's the start of our season, and what was it, 92, 91 or something like that, whatever it was.
92, yep.
Year. We had the best record in I think in football, definitely the AFC. We had the best record in the AFC. Had a home field advantage throughout. And that's where, we all made a mistake. We took a week off. We were not experienced in the playoffs. We've been there a few times, but we were not seasoned guys. And the thing that hurt us probably the most, and Bill admitted this later, is Bubby Brister had been on a tear. And Neil had been out for like 6 weeks. And Neil
well, I guess it's not hyperbolic to say a matter of life and death because of what happened to you in Chicago. Just a horrific situation that almost cost you your life.
Yeah, people always get mistaken what ended my career. People say, oh, concussion ended your career. No, it did not. If that would have been the case, I wouldn't have played after the Monday night game against Kansas City. Improper care ended my career. If I'm cared for better and properly, I'm not back on the field too early. If I have another type of head trauma, and I'm at least removed, hopefully, from it far enough that I don't go into cardiac arrest, and eventually my career is over at that moment. And that's what happened, and that's what a lot of the misunderstandings with that. In life, you things come your way you didn't see coming. I surely didn't see my career ending like that, even it being a factor. But it did. And one thing that I look back on it now is that, listen, we've made sports a lot better and the game a lot better because of incidents like that, and it's not a chance to sling mud. I think it's a chance to praise and applaud all the advancements, improvements from the protocols, the equipment, to the instruction of how the game is played at every level now. How much better and safer it is than it's ever been. And that's really what's, I think, probably more disheartening now is there's a fear factor with contact sports when that is the complete antithesis of what's going on in sports. There's no science that says kids are going to have issues later in life from playing contact sports. There's none of that. In fact, if you look at the leading cause of head trauma in this entire country, it's tripping and falling. And you can do that in your office or in a shower or walking down your stairs. I mean, there's a greater chance you having head trauma there than in a sporting environment. And if there's protocols and the proper procedure and care, you got the right environment to be a part of a place where you'll be cared for properly and then treated properly before you return back to the environment. So it's a much better, safer environment now than it was back then, and that's a good thing, and I wish more people would talk about that and we present that, because that is the true facts of what's going on. The environment is an exciting environment. If I had my young kids now, I'd be sprinting. Even though my kids played all the sports and I coached them, it's even better today than it was back then. So, hopefully that's what will eventually be the thing that is the main narrative about sports now, not the made up narrative that Boston University has created with absolutely no scientific evidence to back that.
Because once again, the people that may not recall, you actually stopped breathing. You actually flatlined and were resuscitated in that situation. I mean, that's the severity of what we're talking about.
Yeah, it wasn't. Listen, I don't remember any of it, to be honest with you. I don't remember. I remember actually a couple of things. I remember being asked by a teammate, "Are you okay?" And that's when I went into cardiac arrest shortly after that. Ironically, when they tried to resuscitate me, I actually started breathing again. And I actually walked to the ambulance. They went from starting to resuscitate me to me walking to the ambulance. They told me that later. I was like, huh. That's, but I do remember our linebacker. I forget his name, but he'd been in Pittsburgh, and then he went to Dallas, and then we reconnected in Chicago. We're sitting in the training room in the stadium, and I remember I was feeling funny, and he's like, "You all right?" And that's the last thing I remember. But, listen, I'm with the things that are established today. I go back to care. Okay, well, I got cleared over the phone to play 5 days later after I didn't even know where I was or who I was for some 7 hours after the hit. Okay, that right there, 2 signs of severity. It is not losing consciousness. Once you regain consciousness, that symptom is gone. Is losing consciousness a symptom? Yes, but not a sign of severity. Only if you don't come out of you don't ever wake up. Well, then you got a real problem. That's the only thing that you're focusing on as far as a symptom.
Right.
We got to keep you awake. Okay. Once you become conscious, then the signs of severity are cognitive recall and balance. And that's why those things are constantly evaluated and looked at, repaired and looked at and looked at. And that's how we do it now, to make sure and do things to help you repair before you return back to your environment. And you got to show you do that before you return. Well, I didn't do any of that. And none of that. I got cleared over the phone, and I got asked one question: "How you feeling?" And I had a ringing headache when I was asked this, but I didn't know that was a symptom back then either. So you got to know players, people know now what symptoms are. I didn't. I was like, well, yeah, I got a little headache. I didn't say that. I was like, I feel great. I want to play. But I had no idea that was a symptom I should be sharing. It wasn't told to me. I wish I would have been. But I don't even know if that would have got me where I couldn't play. He said, good, you're good.
Yeah.
You're back in 1994. That's still archaic not to come and physically look at a player in the National Football League. But now listen, the Chicago Bears from that moment on became, I think, one of the first teams to make cognitive testing mandatory. They completely upped their protocol and changed and made it a better environment. That's what you expect to do, okay? So slinging mud and pointing fingers is not going to do anything. They advance forward, and they're one of the best organizations in football in that department, as all teams really are.
You even mentioned that Chuck Noll, I saw one reference, was, dare we say it, not surprisingly, he was ahead of his time in terms of cognitive testing and evaluation. You referenced back in the late 80s when you first came to the NFL.
We're not where we are today without Chuck Noll, because Joe Maroon came in. This is how it all started. Joe comes in on a Friday, tells Chuck, I don't think Bubby should practice. He had a concussion last week. He goes, I don't like how he answered me this week. It's a Friday. Chuck's like, wait a minute, time out. You can't come in here and tell me on a Friday after I watched the guy for 3 days, didn't do anything wrong, looked great, can't play. If it's that severe, if it's that, conspicuous, we need to have subjective and objective evaluations. Shouldn't we have more than just one? If we got to look at this thing more in depth. So he became real cerebral about, like, listen, he was thinking about the player. He was thinking, hey, if we're going to do the right thing, well, let's put the right tools into place. And that's what's Joe Maroon, Dr. Lovell, go to work and create cognitive testing. We become the first group of players ever to do that in 1991. Doesn't happen if Chuck Noll doesn't challenge Joe to do something other than your opinion. Let's get a testing. Let's evaluate players better. It's before we return them to play. So it all started with Chuck Noll.
Got to give credit where credit is due to a great coach, and also ahead of his time, and obviously an absolutely vital, critical area. And then you begin a 2-decade relationship, pretty amazing in the world of the media, for 2 decades, a fixture on ESPN. And once again, I'm just running down the shows. NFL matchup you did with Jaws. These are all shows that I really enjoyed too, and I know that there's a lot of folks out there that would agree. NFL Primetime, NFL Live, the beginning of ESPN2, dabbling in the fantasy football coverage. And, of course, once again, I thought it was significant. Your career in ESPN began in 1996, but your career in the media, that was when people became aware of you on the national level, but you were way ahead of it as far as the media itself. It started a decade earlier as a player. You had responsibilities and experience, much valuable experience in the media.
Ironically, I was going to get into broadcasting. I was one of the first players to ever do a call-in radio, to go in the studio and, back up, to just call in and talk about a game on a Friday. One of the first players to ever do that. That then turned into going into a studio on a Monday after a game to talk about it. By the time I go to Chicago, I have 2 deals with one with CBS doing a pre and a post game show and a Monday night radio show, 2-hour radio show at Walter Payton's restaurant. And that was part of my deal going into Chicago as far as, broadcasting was going. I mean, back then you didn't have all the camps and all of the boot camps that you have now and all the advanced treatment and knowledge and experience and things that you get to do and learn about it before you enter it, So I felt very, very fortunate and blessed that I had, I go back to Chuck. Chuck was really a challenger to do your part. Don't take advantage of your platform, don't abuse your platform. And he was very balanced in that aspect. You have responsibility, build those relationships, use them, but don't abuse them. That means you have, somebody's going to give you an opportunity, show up on time, be respectful, things like that. And he was, had I not had that counsel, even though it seems, very common sense, it's just, he preached about it all the time, so that you knew not to take it for granted. And had I not listened to him or that counsel, I may not have done the DVE radio show that ends up starting my career, because I don't want to get up at 5 and be there at 6 o'clock in the morning after a Sunday game. It's not really on my to-do list. Okay. But he always talked about your life's work. And I was thinking, well, shoot, this is something that I kind of think I want to do. So maybe I better invest in it when I can. And I still do that radio show. Show. I did it when I played in Chicago, actually. So it was a great move for me. And I've loved every aspect of television and radio for over the 20 years I've done it.
We talked about a pivotal moment in your life back on July 3rd, 1979, and the farm-related work accident, and another significant date in the life of Merril Hoge. Ironically, Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2003, and you got a diagnosis, which I guess at the time, as a healthy, vital young man at the time and former professional athlete, you just weren't. How could you possibly be prepared for it at that time when you got that news?
Well, I don't know anybody. When you hear the word cancer, that's an overwhelming and a very consuming word. And there's so many things that come after that. I call it the dark days of diagnosis. That's the start of a lot of awful things, quite honestly. But I will say this: as devastating as that was in my life, it probably saved my life. And why I say that is I had an aorta defect that they discovered on my last PET CAT scan to clear me some 6 years later, that they never would have discovered. In fact, when they discovered it, I asked the doctor, I go, like, when would you kind of figured that out or seen that? And he said, in your autopsy. I was like, what? Yeah, we got no reason to look at that. He goes, these are the things that are called widowmakers. You just don't see them coming. And he said, short of being at a hospital with somebody who knows exactly what's going on and responds immediately, he goes, there's no way to save you. So, as brutal as that was, going through chemotherapy and cancer and that journey, it saved my life. It's given me a perspective I've never lost, and I get to use and apply daily. And I get to share that story too, because there's a lot of people that might be listening to this or watching this that might be dealing with that right now. And what you need and garner from people who have survived it, it gives you hope. And that's what I searched for, is, people that could give me some hope. I had a lot of good treatments, a lot of good people. ESPN was terrific in the process. The people I worked with were incredible. I did the draft about halfway through my chemotherapy. And that, to me, it was the most devastating thing to go on television bald. I can't even tell you. I was like, it's like, I told you, the dark days of diagnosis, it just kept getting worse. I was like, holy cow, I got television bald. And the people, really behind the scenes were so pivotal in helping me through that whole process and gaining a perspective in a way to go about doing it versus a fear factor. So I like sharing the story. I appreciate you bringing it up, and I'm grateful for it because it did save my life.
Indeed. And prompted, your first book was Find a Way, and 3 words that have really defined your life. And that's given you the opportunity to share the story and really built the foundation for your motivational speaking, which you continue through to the present day.
Yeah, well, you stumble into some, some passions in life. I said my passion was football. I wanted to play football. When I think of all the things football has led me to, and challenges, obstacles that you think are devastating at the time, but what comes from them. Sitting in a chemotherapy chair, I get challenged by a good friend of mine, Charlie LaValle, who'd hired a film crew the day to video me. And I thought we were just documenting me as a dad and talking about my kids. And Find a Way came up. I shared that with him. He's like, oh my gosh, I never knew that. He goes, you need to write a book. And I said, Charlie, I survive. I'll write your book. But I basically was like, I got to survive. And that's all I care about. I am not worried about a book. And about a year later, he called me up. He said, remember that promise you made me? Yeah, I don't remember. But so that now then it took me a couple of years to write the book because that was not easy. Just finding the people that could help me do it right because I'd never done it before. So finding the people that could help me was a journey. But I was able to find them, and then I just republished it because I added my open heart surgery, my ESPN career in there, or the end of it, that wasn't in the first edition. But those words have helped me live a dream and fight to live. And they still stimulate me today about taking action towards things and, being responsible for your circumstances and doing something about them versus pointing fingers and casting blame and making excuses. Self-reflect, make some changes, create a plan, and then take action. And those words have inspired that in my entire life, no matter what it is that comes my way.
And the most recent book that you have co-authored actually with Peter Cummings, doctor, forensic professor at Boston University that you've combined with, and Brainwashed: Bad Science Behind CTE and the Plot to Destroy Football. And really a mission for you, Merril, that goes back to the moment you were resuscitated, if you will, in 1994, to find out the truth and to be able to provide both sides of the story as to what's gone on, particularly what's gone on in the media in the last several years.
Right. And actually, that's what stimulated the whole the book, quite honestly. The goal was not to write a book. I just want to know what the honest truth was. And I had a lot of relationships in that industry and that profession. And I started asking. And the more I asked, I'd ask for the same thing. I'm like, hey, listen, explain to me what CTE is, how football's causing this. And they're like, whoa. And this is everybody. Whoa, stop. Merril, it's a pattern in an observation state scientifically. We don't know what causes it. We don't know what it causes. And I was like, well, time out. That's not what I hear on television.
Right.
Then they're like, well, then read the scientific literature, verify it for yourself. And then lo and behold, they were right. So I'll give you one. I'll give you the example that the thing that tips it, that sparks almost a must that people need to understand the truth of all what the science really says versus what is being said in the media. The only way you could do that is to put a book together. It was really what started, but it was the Spectrum of Disease paper. It was the first paper that I ever got challenged to read. I read it. It was authored by Ann McKee. Okay. The conclusion of that paper, they did this methodology. Methodology is how did they go about this study? And the methodology, if you did this in you did this in a senior class in high school, they'd flunk you, quite honestly. Because the methodology was such garbage. they, in the conclusion, basically acknowledge that. But if you were in a science class, they'd be like, this is not what we're looking for. They would flunk you for doing this. But that being said, the conclusion basically says, I'm paraphrasing, but you can't give veterans or football players any sense of degree of CTE from this research paper they did based on how they went about it. It says it in the conclusion. You can't do it because the methodology is so bad. The only truth in the conclusion, it does say, then it goes on to say, if this can be replicated and duplicated, which is scientific requirements. That's what has to happen. Let's say you find something. Well, then a bunch of other different science groups try to see if they can replicate and duplicate what you do. If we do, we're like, you do have something. But then you keep doing things all different angles. And if it keeps coming back to what you said, you got something. Right. If it doesn't, you got nothing. Okay? So there's two parts to this. The conclusion, that part is dead on spot, and even says you might have something, which is also true. Doesn't mean you have something. You might have something. 9 other institutions try to do what Boston University was doing in this study, claiming football's causing this, right? None of them can do it. That's from the Mayo Clinic, Wisconsin, Stanford University. I mean, quality, integrity universities, scientific departments. None of them could come up with it. In fact, the Wisconsin paper came up with the band members and theatrical people had more brain health issues later in life than did sports people.
Wow.
Nobody put that on the news and shut down the band and shut down.
Haven't heard that.
Never heard that, right?
No.
Okay. Then we go all the way back to where it went wrong. In the media, you heard, let me back up. Ann McKee's asked about this from a journalist. He's like, after doing that research, what's your conclusion? This is what Ann McKee says. I got to believe all football players have it. Well, now, just a minute. You wrote a conclusion that said you can't give anybody, any football player or veteran, any sense of degree of CTE because of the garbage that you got in there. Why would you say that in a public setting and a media setting when it's a lie? Let's go to the journalist. If you're a good journalist, if you're a true journalist, you go read the paper. You read the conclusion, then you march your butt right back to Ann McKee and go, Ann, why would you lie? Why would you use the Hippocratic oath you signed to do no harm? You deliberately contradicted what you said in a scientific paper where it says you can't use this. You just said all football players have it based on what your evidence is on this paper. Well, he doesn't do that. He just prints landmark study, all football players have it if you're going to play it. Well, that's what you see on the evening news. So in some ways, I can't blame people for being so scared, but then you almost got to go, listen, you got to have some common sense in life, and you can't take everything that you see out of the media and think it's going to be true. Okay. You got to do some research. I got to be a little suspicious too of what's going on. I do a little bit of use your own experience in life. If you used contact sports and you concluded Canada with hockey, with over 100 years of playing sports with no protocols, no treatments, awful instruction, paper mache to equipment that exists today, you only have 1 billion people to pick from. We would have epidemics mentally across this country and in Canada that you couldn't put a finger on if that were really true. If sports was doing this. There's no scientific evidence of that. And all the papers are not just all the papers from Boston University. It's all the other papers that people tried to replicate and duplicate. It's all in the book for you to read. And I didn't exclude anything. I brought it all out there so you could see exactly what was written in there versus what you saw in the media. And then it gives you a true perspective of the truth. But you're also dealing with, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled. And you gotta, and I'm not interested in changing people's mind, but I am interested in opening it up and for you to think that there is more evidence out there. There's a lot more. Sports are better and safer now than they've ever been in the history of sports, quite honestly. And what's sad is there's such a decline in all sports because of the fear that you're going to get hurt. Well, I'm not saying you're not going to get hurt, and I'm not saying a concussion is a good thing, but cared for properly and evaluated and treated, it is such a better environment today. And head trauma, there's a greater chance of that happening in your home than it is in an athletic arena, especially when you have protocols and the right structure and the proper equipment into place.
You had extensive experience coaching youth football, and you've talked about the fact that there's a way to teach the game safely and fundamentally, which you've practiced. And if you look all the way to the NFL and what's happened in recent years, you talk about it being safer than ever. Merril, I'm sure you think back, I'm sure fondly, to what training camp used to be like, with two-a-days, with contact, with the type of drills you've been running. But you've got an NFL now with a plethora of rule changes for safety, the way training camp has been regulated, the way practices are now governed in season in particular, and also the helmets, just the protective headgear itself, and how that's evolved to the point that it's at now. And to your point that it's safer than it ever has been because of this evolution, that you're trying to educate people to let them know there's two sides to this.
Yeah, and probably the best part about what environment every sporting environment should have, if none of that other stuff existed that you just talked about, a protocol to care for it if it happens. That's
right.
The most important thing.
In place.
Remove them. Don't let them keep playing. Let's evaluate them and get them treatment before they return back to play. That's the best part. Helmet's not going to stop anything, although the helmet is 100% better than it was 10 years ago. So that's great value in it. Playing the game right, great value in it. It doesn't mean you're immune to get hurt. It can still happen. But aren't we better off if we know how to care for people if they are hurt, and that there are treatments, which there are, that we can apply and do that will not affect you, that you're not going to have affect short and long-term health because you had a concussion. I mean, if that were the case, then you wouldn't ever want to go on a roller coaster, jump on a trampoline, step into a shower.
Right, exactly. That's right. And we had Gene Fugit on the Games People Play back, I guess it was about 3 weeks ago, and he talked about football, the value of football, the value of high school football, and his numbers translated into the infantry. I believe he was looking at the infantry that fought and defended the country in World War II. 92% played high school football. So naturally, Gene said, I mean, how could we lose, particularly in Europe, when it was football versus soccer? We had football players against soccer players in Europe. I'm not going to dispute the 92% because I didn't skip 2 grades in high school, and I didn't graduate from Amherst at 20. But I thought you might want to know that just for your own edification, Merril, about the value of high school football.
This is, I mean, there's a lot of, there's truth to that. Listen, football and sports, they build self-esteem, confidence, accountability, responsibility, developing habits, caring about your health. I mean, and that's such an important thing. How you go about the life lessons that you established there allows you to transition to other environments and gives you a tool belt and tools to do that. When you don't have those experiences in life, it is harder to do that. And sports gives you so much value. And there's a lot of kids who are struggling that need hope, need things that give them ways, therapies and remedies to work through a lot of their issues. I remember when my mom died, I remember being so glad I could go to football practice. There was like 2.5, 3 hours where I didn't have to deal with the grieving process. And I was like, so sports helps you with a lot of those things that can be traumatizing kids in their life.
Merril, today we've mentioned your extensive motivational speaking, and also just to have an opportunity here to talk about your philanthropic work, which is also very wide-ranging. The Highmark Caring Foundation, the Chuck Knoll Foundation for Brain Injury Research, Concussion Research. Hopefully I didn't leave anything out. You're on the board of directors with the Highmark Caring Foundation. Just to give us a perspective on some of these organizations that you're involved with and very committed to, and what they do and how they've helped the community, and how many lives that they've affected positively.
Well, I'm the chairman of the board of the Caring Place, and that is a grieving center for families that have lost a loved one. And because of my loss as a mom, my loss when I lost my mom, I understand the sting of death, the grieving process. But I had no resource to go to. Like I just said, football was my sanctuary. The grieving process, there's no timetable to that. And the Caring Place is a sanctuary for really kids, families to come and give them a place where everybody's dealing with the same thing, and it can help you recover and reboot your life versus let your life spiral out of control with no help. So it's a great resource, and it's a free resource for all families that experience, some type of tragedy in their life. And nobody's immune to that. I don't care who you are. It's just, you're not immune to that. And then, being on the Chuck Knoll Foundation for Brain Injury Research, I'm passionate about that we're doing things and getting resources out there in all environments, not just sports, but activities, for parents, and giving and getting information, updated science, the right kinds of equipment, instruction being done, and how can we help advance and make things a better environment for people in the activities that they're involved in.
And also wanted to reference the Your Call Football, which you founded back a couple of years ago, which I didn't know about until I started to do a little more research about you and your career. But a great concept and a highly innovative, dare I say it, we're about the same age, a high-tech concept, if you will. In this age, got to stay with the times here in the new millennium.
You know what? It was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had in sports, to be a head coach for 1 year and lead men and teach them the game and help them with life lessons too, and help them, very similar to what Chuck did for me. And then the next year to run a league, even though we were only a 2-team league, you got a lot of things to oversee, and the great people I got to work with, coach with, the players I got to be involved with. It was just a fascinating experience. And we pulled off something that most people say you couldn't do. It's live Madden. And we did it. And it was good football. It was exciting football. Fans who were a part of it made a lot of money. So we accomplished everything, and there's going to still be bits and pieces of it maybe in the NFL season this year with different teams using some of the concepts from their technology.
Your family, your son was a highly decorated quarterback in Kentucky. You make your home in Fort Thomas, Kentucky, and unfortunately he had some injury issues that ended his career prematurely at BYU. But that said, your brother Marty, his son, once again, do we have a season, not have a season, is a prospect on the O-line at BYU. And I saw an interview, I listened to an interview with Marty, fast for football. Is that what it's going to take? We got to get your take. Are we going to have what's the football season going to look like in the informed opinion of Merril Hoge? Is the NFL going to get it done? Are the conferences?
I think the NFL gets it done just because they're not as big. They have money to do things for like everybody's tested, a nose test every day when you come in. They just have so many ways to, and they've had time to get ready. So they have plans for different, when the goalposts get moved. So I don't think any doubt it'll get done. Will there be some bumps in the road? There's no doubt because stuff changes all the time. But I think they're very equipped as a league and individually with teams dealing with each state and the different requirements and stuff, and having time that the NFL will pull it off. I think it'll be a little harder for college. But I clearly think the NFL gets it done.
Well, we can only hope. I said at the beginning of this pandemic, Merril, if we ever get to a NFL season and there was no games, now we got a problem. I think we definitely got a problem. There'll be panic in the streets. There'll be open revolt if we don't get our NFL.
I'm with you, my brother. I'm with you.
Indeed the case. Well, I guess I'm going to quote you here as we wind it down. This was in reference to one of your battles, you battle with cancer, and you said it is destroyable, it is beatable, you have everything in you to do it, and the mind is a powerful thing. And when I look at the sum total of the games that you've played beyond the playing field, the head trauma, the cancer with the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a serious car accident, open heart surgery, battling depression, and the fact that through it all, you have, I'm going to change tense, you have found a way, Merril, I think is a true inspiration. And I know you've inspired me, and I'm sure everybody that has an opportunity to access our program here. You have played well with me today, sir. Merril Hoge and the Games People Play. Really enjoyed it.
Well, Bernie, I could just tell you this. Let me first conclude with this. I'm a product of a lot of people, okay? By no stretch of the imagination is this all about me, because I've had great people. I've done a lot of interviews, a lot. I have never sat down in front of somebody more prepared than you. So it was an absolute honor. I appreciate you. Even there was a couple of things you brought to my attention I completely forgot about. So that's great work on your end. We need more journalists like you out in the field. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of your show.
Thank you very much. And my final point is I wrote this note this afternoon because I was talking about the whole concept of a fullback. On next week's The Games People Play, I'm going to talk to a blacksmith.
There you have it, baby.
Old school fullback, Merril Hoge. Thanks very much. Once again, you played well with us today, and thank you for the kind words, Merril. Really appreciate it. And when this lifts, we'll have to get you to Boston. We'll get you to the Fours, and we'll get you.
My doctor, I'll come swing out and check it out. My doctor is he's the head of Boston. He's the head of Harvard Medical School.
Oh, at Harvard Medical.
Harvard Medical, yeah. So I go see him. They took him from Pittsburgh. So now when I go get my heart checkup, I got to go there. So we'll have a chance eventually meet then.
Well, we'll make it a date. And truth be told, true confession, I am the voice of Harvard football. I've been broadcasting Harvard football since 1998. As I tell everybody, even though my SAT scores didn't get any better, Merril. So maybe we'll work out your appointment with a football game.
That I would love. We'll make that happen somehow, some way, okay? Because I come around October.
Indeed. Okay, we'll get you to venerable Harvard Stadium, and you can enjoy a moment there. Thanks very much, Mel. Really appreciate it. God bless you.
Take care. Bye, Bernie.
Merril Hoge, our guest here on Season 1, Episode 11 of The Games People Play. As we wrap it up, thanks to Merril, thanks to executive producer Andy Bernstein. He supplied the terrible towel. There it is, the terrible towel. We got to get that up, and really appreciate that. Andy is a diehard Steeler fan, and also, of course, doesn't get any higher than that, the Mean Joe Green jersey. Andy and I are going to reenact a soft drink commercial here in the next few minutes. Thank you to another Steeler fan who is west of the Mississippi for many years, but no less a fan of the Steelers, to Todd, and also to Kiwan. Thanks to them. And, of course, thanks to the Fours, Peter Colton, once again here at the Fours. And if you don't believe me, just consult Sports Illustrated, America's #1 sports bar and restaurant here, 166 Canal Street in Boston. So to the next time on The Games People Play, Bernie Corbett saying, play the game well.